The Soul in the City, Plato's Republic. Plato lived from 424 BC to 348 BC. He started a school called the Academy where he would teach his students philosophy. He was the student of Socrates and in turn taught Aristotle. He mostly wrote in dialogues, and his most famous was The Republic. In Book 1 of The Republic, Socrates asks, "What's justice?" Cephalus responds, "Speaking truth and paying debts." Like returning borrowed stuff? Sure. Like returning a borrowed weapon from a madman? Never mind. Polemarchus joins in. What's justice? Helping friends and harming enemies. Who is a friend? Someone useful. Or so you think. Someone who is useful. What if you're wrong? Socrates says. Don't we sometimes misjudge who's good? Yeah, sure, you win, Polemarchus says. Also, is teaching justice good for people? Yes. Should we teach bad guys justice? That sounds good. Then should justice harm or help our enemies? Help them learn justice. I already said you won. Next, Thrasymachus comes in. Next, what's justice? Might makes right. What? Whatever is the advantage and will of the stronger person. Justice in the city is the will of the ruler. Is he ever wrong? Socrates asks. Sure, so what? Could he be mistaken about what's helpful to himself? Yeah, I suppose. I'm not convinced I'm wrong, though. You mentioned a ruler or king. Yeah? Is a shepherd like a sheep ruler? I suppose. Does he care for his sheep? Of course. Does he risk his own safety for others? Yes. Then shouldn't a king's goal also be the good of his people? Okay, you're right, I'm wrong. So what's justice? You have questions, but do you have answers? Being a king is more free and happy than a thief or a slave. Everyone would be unjust if they could get away with it. Hold on. Don't you think someone who can't rule their own desires is a slave to them? What do you mean? The unjust man who does not control his passions is in a state of civil war and not of one mind. I'm tracking you. He is his own worst enemy and the enemy of just people. Then what's justice? If civil war is injustice in the city, justice in a person is a function of the soul, a kind of health. Justice is a soul's virtue, and it makes them happy and blessed. The unjust person is a curse to themselves. Okay, cool. So thanks, Sock. Peace out. Cheers. Cheers. Book 2. Glaucon joins in. Not so fast. What? I'm not convinced. What's the problem? Do we desire justice for itself or for its instrumental benefit? Socrates says both. Justice is good for its own sake and for its benefits. Nah. People want the reputation of being good, but they'll be bad if they could get away with it. Let me explain. Let's discuss the first subject I mentioned, what justice is and what its origins are. We can see most clearly that those who practice justice do it unwillingly, because they lack the power to do injustice. That is, if in our thoughts we grant to a just and an unjust person the freedom to do whatever they like, we can then follow both of them and see where their desires would lead, and we'll catch the just person red-handed, traveling the same road as the unjust. The reason for this is the desire to outdo others and get more and more. This is what anyone's nature naturally pursues as good. But nature is forced by law into the perversion of treating fairness with respect. The freedom I mentioned would be most easily realized if both people had the power they say the ancestor of Gyges of Lydia possessed. The story goes that he was a shepherd in the service of the ruler of Lydia. There was a violent thunderstorm. An earthquake broke open the ground and created a chasm at the place where he was tending his sheep. Seeing this, he was filled with amazement and went down into it. And there, in addition to many other wonders of which we are told, he saw a hollow bronze horse. There were window-like openings in it, and peeping in, he saw a corpse, which seemed to be of more than human size, wearing nothing but a gold ring on its finger. He wore the ring at the usual monthly meeting that reported to the king on the state of the flocks. And as he was sitting among the others, he happened to turn the setting of the ring towards himself to the inside of his hand. When he did this, he became invisible to those sitting near him, and they went on talking as if he had gone. He wondered at this, and fingering the ring, he turned the setting outwards again and became visible. So he experimented with the ring to test whether it indeed had this power, and it did. If he turned the setting inward, he became invisible. If he turned it outward, he became visible again. When he realized this, he at once arranged to become one of the messengers sent to report to the king. And when he arrived there, he seduced the king's wife, attacked the king with her help, killed him, and took over the kingdom. Let's suppose then that there were two such rings, one worn by a just and the other by an unjust person. Now no one, it seems, would be so incorruptible that he would stay on the path of justice or stay away from other people's property when he could take whatever he wanted, seduce anyone he wished, kill, and do all the other things that would make him like a god among humans. Rather, his actions would be in no way different from those of an unjust person, and both would follow the same path. This, some would say, is a great proof that one is never just willingly, but only when compelled to be. No one believes justice to be a good when it is kept private, since wherever either a person thinks he can do injustice with impunity, he does it. In the end, justice is the social contract of weaklings. It's kept for wages and reputation. Hey, I'm Glaucon's brother, and we're Plato's brothers. I agree with Glaucon. We're kind of playing devil's advocate here. I like justice, but your arguments aren't giving us any detail. What does justice look like? Yeah. Yes. Indeed. Chillax. This is gonna take a while to explain, like a whole book. Justice in a single person is like justice in a city. The city is justice writ large. The individual is a microcosm of a city. It's easier to look at the parts of something big than something small, so let's talk city justice. A city begins because individuals aren't self-sufficient. People need many things, including each other. We're better off together. Each person does their job best if they hone one skill instead of doing everything. Pretty soon, a group of people will need lots of specialized craftsmen. Distribution of labor grows the city. Maybe this city doesn't need to grow anymore. They've got the pleasures of a simple life. This city is fit for pigs. How do you mean? We don't just want a simple city, we want a luxurious city, a beautiful city, Callipolis. Then we're going to need a bigger city. It'll need more people for more crafts, hunters, poets, musicians and artists, and all manner of other crafts. As our village grows into a beautiful city, we'll need not only craftsmen but a class of guardians to lead and protect it. To lead, guardians will need the best education, both physical and mental. They'll need stories of heroic virtue, not Homer's epics about gods as misguided as men. Stories of virtue to inspire guardians to pursue it. It's an education that cultivates the pursuit of truth and the love of wisdom, which is philosophy. Book 3. Their education will include stories, poetry, myth, the best of physical training. Guardians must cultivate both the spirited part of the soul, the seat of courage, and reason, the philosophic part of the soul. Only those born for the task will be selected. But since reason and courageous spirit are two separate parts of the soul, we'll need to split guardians into two groups, each specializing in what they were born for. Let's call this new group auxiliaries, the warrior class. Those who cultivate the life of the mind, dedicated to ruling the city by philosophy, are the guardians, the philosopher kings, and thus a kingship or aristocracy is best. We now have three classes related to the three parts of the soul: guardians for the rational part, auxiliaries for the spirited part, and craftsmen or workers for the base passions. Since each person in the city should pursue what they are naturally suited for, we'll tell them the myth of metals. Before they were born, they were nurtured deep in the earth. The land gave birth to them. It is their motherland, and they must protect it. The God who made them made some with gold, silver, iron and bronze, depending on what role they were to have. To ensure harmony among the guardians, they shouldn't have property. All goods are in common, so they'll look out for the interests of all. Book 4, Enter Adamantus. Hey, since guardians rule, the city really belongs to them, yet they derive no good from it. We aren't aiming to make any one group outstandingly happy, but to make the whole city so, as far as possible. The happiness of the whole city is the common good of all. This isn't the social contract of Glaucon, where society is just a tool for individual gain. No individual can be fully happy, isolated, and pursuing private interest. We must pursue the common good above all. The common good isn't just a tool for each person to get their own private happiness. Rather, each individual partakes in happiness insofar as they are a contributing member of the whole. Each will be happy if they are part of the happy city, and the city will be happiest if everyone does their part. As I said, justice is the harmony of the whole city. One is happy if they are part of the whole that is happy. Much can be said on the formation of the city, its education and laws. But we should speak most of the virtues that cause the city and its people to be happy and flourish. The 4 cardinal virtues are prudence, which is practical wisdom, fortitude or courage, temperance, self-control or moderation, and justice. Each relates to a part of the soul and a city class and a body part. A worker relates to appetite, temperance, iron and bronze, and stomach. Auxiliaries relate to spirit, fortitude, silver, and the chest. Guardians relate to reason, prudence, gold, and the head. They also correspond to the development of the city. Workers relate to the city of pigs. Auxiliaries are needed when you have the luxurious city. And then eventually we will have the purified city, which is purified by reason, by philosophy, by the guardians. Justice in this city is each class doing one's own work and not meddling with what isn't one's own. Justice in the soul is reason leading spirit and appetite, each doing its part and not trying to lead when it shouldn't. Justice is nearly synonymous with virtue. Injustice is civil war in the city, or untrained appetites and spirit in the soul. In both the soul and the city, each must do its part and not meddle in others, otherwise order yields to chaos. Justice is like health, which is desired for its own sake and for its benefits. Book 5. Just a minute, we've got 3 waves of objections. First, what about equality between men and women? Women should be allowed to do anything a man can do, though for some things they may be worse and some better. As I said earlier, each should do what they're best at. But all should receive the same education. Second, you said wives and children would be held in common. All are the parents of all? Yes, to promote unity. None will look out for only his own family, but the city will be his family. Each will look out for the interests of all. Much could be said about their education and happiness. Third, how will this city be possible? Who will lead? The ruler must be a philosopher king from the guardians, or an aristocracy of philosophers. What's a philosopher? Philosophers know that the difference between opinion, belief, and knowledge is that knowledge is justified true belief. Opinion is halfway between ignorance and knowledge. In short, a philosopher loves wisdom. They pursue truth more than proving they're right and want justice more than reputation. Book 6. What are philosopher kings like? They pursue the pleasures of the soul, not the body. Is it true that there'll be no end to the evils in our city until philosophers rule? Well, it's like the captain and sailors of a ship. The sailors fight about who should steer the ship, each wanting to be the captain. Some try taking the lead by persuasion, others by force. Meanwhile, the true captain navigates by the stars. The sailors see him as a good-for-nothing stargazer. They don't understand what he's looking at. To them, he seems to be a madman. So they overthrow him, but they crash because they don't have knowledge. The same happens to true philosophers. Seldom are they heard, and often are they ignored as madmen. But philosopher kings will not rule if education fails and the city does not select them to rule. If they rule, we'll have a purified city. A city with the virtues of justice, temperance, fortitude, and prudence. Is there anything better than those virtues? Indeed there is. Knowing the good, the highest form, that gives rise to all else. Like the sun, it is brightest and best, and by its light all is and is understood. Think of it like a divided line. All is on a continuum from most to least real. The line is divided into the visible or material world and the invisible realm of the forms or ideas. Forms are what we know when we understand the qualities or definition of things, the perfect conception of those things. This relates to both being, metaphysics, and knowing, epistemology. We can subdivide further into images, objects, mathematical forms, higher forms, then the good. This relates to imagination, perception, reasoning, and understanding. Overall, it describes knowing versus opining. True knowledge is of the highest forms, and the highest of all is the good. Book 7. Learning the good can be described with the allegory of the cave. Imagine human beings living in an underground cave-like dwelling. They're imprisoned and shackled. The cave's opening is far behind them. Near behind them is a fire and puppets casting shadows on the wall before them. This is all they've ever known. All their conversation is about the shadows. One prisoner is freed, stands up, turns around, and is blinded by the light of the fire. He does not willingly look at the light because it blinds, hurts, and dazes him. Seeing the light, he realizes what he knew wasn't real. Surely the puppets and fire are. Reluctant to learn more due to the painful process, someone drags him up and out of the cave. In the sunlight, he is more dazed than ever. As he looks around, he sees a reflection in the water. Surely this is real. He next sees things themselves as they are, not shadows, puppets, or reflections. He sees by the light of the sun, but his eyes hurt if he tries to look at it. He can't take it in completely or understand fully what it is because it is too great for him. Armed with at least partial knowledge of the sun and reality, he returns to his friends to enlighten and free their minds from ignorance. His words are nonsense to them. New is strange, sounds ridiculous, and is unwelcome. They think his adventure has cost him his sanity. What's more, his words will corrupt them, and so they execute him. So much for the life of the philosopher and why the city needs education of the good. But there's an important warning. When young people get their first taste of arguments, they misuse it by treating it as a kind of game of contradiction. They imitate those who've refuted them by refuting others themselves, and like puppies, they enjoy dragging and tearing those around them with their arguments. Then when they've refuted many and have been refuted by them in turn, they forcefully and quickly fall into disbelieving what they've believed before, and as a result, they themselves and the whole of philosophy are discredited in the eyes of others. But an older, more mature person won't want to take part in such madness. He'll imitate someone who is willing to engage in discussion in order to look for the truth, rather than someone who plays at contradiction for sport. He'll be more sensible himself and will bring honor rather than discredit to the philosophical way of life. Book 8. Since we've talked long of justice in the soul and the city and the philosophical life, let's apply it to different forms of government or regimes, their corresponding states of the soul, and how they deteriorate. Each regime corresponds to a virtue and one of your definitions of justice. The first is kingship or aristocracy, depending on how many philosopher kings there are. Kingship or aristocracy prioritizes prudence, wisdom, and sees justice as health, good in itself and good for all. It decays by the love of honor and money. the chief pursuit becomes honor instead of wisdom. A philosopher's son sees the city not honor his father. Workers complain he's too easygoing. The philosopher settles for the middle ground of pursuing spirit. Second, spirit seeks honor in timocracy, gained by fortitude in battle, which yields spoils of war. It decays when greed discourages risk and courage. Honor is confused with courage when it's actually recognition of virtue. That is to say, honor is a reward for being courageous, but honor is treated as the goal rather than courage as the goal. The city elects by honor and reputation instead of by wisdom. Love of honor is eventually replaced by greed. Third, oligarchy preserves temperance because business sense requires self-control. This is a ruling class of businessmen. It decays as people forget riches came from wisdom and courage. Luxury makes men soft. Laziness, entitlement, and jealousy replace hard work. Workers resent masters, masters oppress, civil war ensues. Inheriting luxuries creates spoiled children who lack temperance, unwilling to train their appetites. They do not practice the temperance of the previous generation, the temperance that was needed to preserve the riches of their city. Fourth, democracy keeps small justice, seen only as equality, pluralism, and tolerance. Without temperance, hedonism and appetite rule. Unrestrained freedom decays to mob rule. Equality opposes justice and becomes a fractured, selfish civil war of special interest groups. As people equate justice with equality, both decay. Freedom becomes hedonism instead of virtue. Equality as fair opportunity is justice, but equality of entitlement and results is injustice. In the resulting chaos, people ask for tyrants and give their freedom in exchange for safety. Moving into Book 9, fifth, tyranny has no virtue. He promises peace, initially pleases people by giving what they want, but ultimately betrays them with extortion and oppression. The tyrant thinks he's the freest of all, but he is a slave to his passions, unhappy and unhealthy in soul. He's defensive and entitled. He sees everyone else as a threat. He demands acceptance while giving none. He does what he wants without wisdom, courage, or self-control. He cares nothing for truth and is his own worst enemy. The worst life lacks all virtue. Man becomes a tyrant to himself, a slave to his passions. As I have said, each regime corresponds to a virtue and type of soul. Each decays as it neglects one of the four virtues. Each of these regimes corresponds to one of our theories of justice. Mine, Socrates, says justice is virtue. Glaucon and Adeimantus say it's a social contract, reputation. That's like a democracy with a reputation of honor. Cephalus is a wealthy man. He says truth in paying debts is justice. That's more like an oligarchy. Polemarchus said helping friends and harming enemies. This relates to the special interest groups of a democracy. Thrasymachus said might makes right. That is tyrannical. Book 10. When you spoke of the good as most real and imitation as least, do you disdain all poetry and stories? No, I disdain loving the pleasantries of poetry more than truth, and especially since many distort knowledge. The worst are those stories which display vice instead of virtue. You're right, knowledge of reality is best. Are any stories good? Only those that teach virtue in heroes and good people. Indeed, we must teach people that any injustice will be rectified after this life. The good will receive their reward and the bad their punishment. I'll tell the myth of Er, the son of Armenius, who once died in war. When the rest of the dead were picked up 10 days later, they were already putrefying, but when he was picked up, his corpse was still quite fresh. He was taken home and preparations were made for his funeral, but on the 12th day he revived and told what he had seen in the world beyond. After his soul left him, it traveled to a marvelous place where there were openings and between them judges sat. Having rendered their judgment, they ordered the just to go upwards into the heavens, and the unjust to travel downwards. When Er himself came forward, they told him that he was to be a messenger to human beings about everything in the place. He saw souls departing after judgment. They went gladly to the meadow like a crowd to a festival. Those who knew each other exchanged greetings and stories to one another. They recalled all they had suffered. For each in turn paid the penalty 10 times over for the unjust things they had done and for the people they had wronged. But if they had done good deeds and had become just and pious, they were rewarded tenfold. One Lachesis gave Er a message. Virtue is free. Each will possess it to a greater or less degree, depending on whether he values or disdains it. The responsibility lies with the one who makes the choice. Souls were told to choose what their next life would be: wealthy, tyrannical, poor, fame, honor, beauty, noble birth, and any other quality. Each was bidden to choose, to seek what they may. We tell this myth that men may choose to pursue virtue, even in poverty and suffering, and reap rewards in the heavens. And we must always know how to choose the mean in such lives and how to avoid either of the extremes. This is the way that a human being becomes happiest. The golden mean is virtue, and the extremes are the deficiency vice and the excess vice. Hence, both in this life and on the 1,000-year journey we've described, we'll do well and be happy.